Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Apologies for no show last week. As you well know, this time of the year is, shall we say, somewhat busy in the shop, and I tend to feel like I actually live there 6-day weeks and all that kind of stuff. However, that wasn't the reason for a show or for a no-show last week, as you can probably hear. Still a bit croaky. The cold I'd been suffering from the week before decided it was really going to kick me in the nuts last week, and believe you me, I was in no fit state to actually do an episode of the show. I'll spare you the grisly details, but yeah, suffice to say, still a bit, you know, and although my nose is probably not working at 100%, I think it's working well enough to give a fair assessment to the samples that I have in front of me for this week's episode of the show. So anyway, as per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched the James Eady episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Very much appreciated. I don't know if I actually heard anything back from James Eady, but you know, I didn't tell them anything that I hadn't already told them, and that's the thing about my reviews. You know, if a company, distributor, independent bottling company, whoever, if they send me samples and they ask me what I think, then obviously I tell them what I think, you know. And so when I come to do an episode of the show, there's no big secret, there's no great revelation, because I've already told them what I think about their particular samples. And yeah, so anyway, today's episode of the show is kind of an episode I've kind of had back in the back of my mind for a little while to do. As you can see, an episode on one of my favourite distilleries, Tomatin. And I think it's been well over a year since I did the last episode of the show on Tomatin, and that was for the release of their French collection bottling. So this episode of the show is looking at then the replacement for that, which is the Portuguese collection. But because there's only 3 in them, I thought, well, you know, as they say, 3 swallows do not make a summer, or something like that. I would see what else I had knocking around, and found an old independent bottling of Tomatin, which is, you know, probably rarer than hen's teeth these days. You just don't see independent bottlings of Tomatin. Plus, as you may well remember, the French collection actually featured 4 releases, 3 which came out all in one go around about, what, June-ish of last year, I think it was, June, July kind of time. And the Cognac one was kind of delayed for, I have no idea why. And so I thought, well, you know, as I hung on to that sample, I may as well include that in this episode of the show. So that's exactly what I intend to do. So not a great deal to say about Tomatin that I haven't said several times before. So we're just going to take a look at today's lineup. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with the youngest bottling in today's tasting. So this is an Edition Spirits bottling. The first edition's Tomatin, 22-year-old. It was distilled in May of 1994, bottled in 2017, a single refill bourbon hoggy, HL 13275. So a big thank you to Hunter Lang for that particular sample. Then, as I mentioned, we're going to look at the late French collection release. This was the Cognac edition. So it was distilled in 2008. Initially aged in American oak before being moved into ex-cognac casks in November of 2018, and then bottled obviously last year at 46%. Then we're going to move on to the new releases. So this is the first in the Portuguese collection. This is a 15-year-old, and it was distilled in September of 2006, first aged in ex-bourbon casks before being moved to ex-Moscatel casks in April of 2015, bottled at 46% and obviously bottled this year. Second release in the Portuguese collection is a 15-year-old Moscatel finish. So again, distilled in September of 2006, moved to the Moscatel cask in April of 2015 and bottled this year. And finally, the third and last bottling in the Portuguese collection is a port finish. Very apt. So again, distilled in September of 2016, moved into port cask in April of 2015 and bottled this year. So really looking forward to that. Always like the way that Tomatin reacts with port. And the final bottling, well, is Tomatin, although as you well know, Bòcan now has its own range and all this kind of stuff, and there's no mention of Tomatin. It's just a Bòcan, but of course, as we know, it's lightly peated Tomatin. So this is the new release, the limited edition 15-year-old, bottled at 50%, aged, I think aged entirety in Oloroso cask. So as you can see from the colour, yeah, quite dark. So yeah, I think that'll be a fitting one to finish on. A little bit of peat and a big chunk of sherry, one imagines. Giving the game away on that one. Anyway, before we get to that point, let's start with the addition spirits. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the 22-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Ooh, that's a lovely nose. I smell that mature bourbon an absolute mile away, even though my nose is probably not at 100%. There is absolutely no mistaking the aromas of mature American oak. The spirit is quite fragrant, quite floral in actual fact. A little bit of almost kind of buttercup, some vanilla, gooseberry, touch of minerality. The longer it sort of sits in the glass, it becomes more mineral, becomes fresher, and that sort of American oak kind of, which was initially quite a big hit, just kind of like dissipates out a little bit. So you know, aerating it again, yeah, gives you more of that American oak, that dusty, mature American oak. I have no idea what this retailed for back in 2017, but one imagines it wasn't particularly cheap, but on the basis of that nose, that is gorgeous. Let's see what the palate like. Palate is quite darker than the nose suggests, not as floral, darker, richer fruit, maltier, lovely, little bit of almost salinity. It's probably my palate sort of playing up a little bit, but that sort of citric note has got an almost salinity, a saline sort of note to it as well. Again, really nice mineral, almost granity on the finish, very Highland on the finish. Pretty, and I don't often tend to get that sort of overt granity character with Tomatin. But then I don't tend to taste an awful lot of Tomatin that's wholly aged in American oak. I mean, I haven't tasted, excuse me, the Legacy, for example, for a long time. That's gorgeous. That was a lovely whiskey, and it said classic sort of malty, rich, sorry, dark Tomatin, and that delivered in absolute spades. Right, okay, so moving on to the first of the distillery releases. This is the Cognac edition. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Distinct cognac notes to kick off with, quite floral cognac notes, light dried fruit, dried apple, dried grape, a little bit of earth, some honey, some vanilla. Nice barley notes coming through now. Again, it's quite floral, really nicely balanced, and I think that was the thing about the French connections. Even the Rivesaltes, the Montblaziac and the Sauternes, they were all just beautifully balanced. Harmony was just absolutely spot on, and this is no different. I mean, it's got that Oh, it's got a lovely lemony note coming through now. Just a sort of, I mean, yes, the cognac notes are obviously noticeable, but they're, again, like I said, really balanced, integrated. Nothing is overloading that nose, and it's a lovely, lovely nose. Let's see what that's like. Soft, barleyed, vanilla to start off with. Cognac notes come through on the mid palate, a little bit of dried grape. There's a little bit of an astringency there. Again, a sort of a minerally sort of citric astringency, which really nicely balances. The American oak kind of comes back on the finish. I'm getting a little bit of sawdust, not a great deal, just a little bit. And that citric character is just continuing, and along with a little bit of dried grape and a sort of a little bit of a cognac note kind of lingering. I mean, that was absolutely gorgeous. Loved the progression, loved the way it kind of opened up with the sort of like the barley, the spirit character, the cognac notes coming through on the mid palate, lingering through as the kind of spirit notes return. I mean, just beautifully balanced in my opinion. Right, okay, so moving on to the first of the Portuguese collection. So this is the Madeira finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end. Quite a lot of Madeira to kick off with. Distinctly grapey, winey, straw, touch of barley, some honey, apple. Just about balanced. I'm certainly getting, again, that sort of minerality, that sort of almost granity kind of note coming through, but it is pretty heavy on the Madeira. That sort of grapey wininess. There's a little bit of a biscuitiness, which I'd often tend to get more with Madeira finishes, although the biscuitiness in this instance is not that noticeable. It's very subtle. A little bit of a floral note, but again, yeah, the balance is just about there. I mean, it is pretty heavy on the Madeira, but overall, I think it works well. Let's sort of pass on. Interesting palate, bit edgy, bit earthy, white fruits to kick off with, then that sort of grapey Madeira sort of honey kind of comes through on the mid palate, a little bit of tannin as well, moves into that sort of granity, sort of minerally kind of note. The honey returns. I like the balance, I like the progression. It's not one-dimensional. Yes, the Madeira character is a little heavier than, say, the cognac character on the Cognac edition, but Madeira does tend to be quite forceful, have a forceful personality, and you know, it is one of those kind of finishes that can go a little bit OTT. I think that it's a little bit more weighted towards the cask finish, but I don't think the balance is too skewed, shall we say. I think it's got a lovely progression to it. It opens up and unwinds quite nicely, so yeah, on the whole, I quite like that. I think that's good. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Moscatel finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Again, quite heavy on the Moscatel. The dried fruit is darker, more plummier, richer. Apricot, sultana. Again, there's that sort of light grapey, honeyed kind of note. A little bit of sweet barley. Some lovely sweet spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, that kind of thing. Not getting a great deal of distillery character. There is some there, just. but it is quite dominant. The Moscatel is a little bit too dominant, possibly. I don't think the balance is quite as good as the Madeira. It's just a little bit more heavier, a little bit more intense. I mean, it's beautifully clean. I mean, it is distinctly different from the Madeira finish, and it just goes to show you how, even though they're both fortified wines, I mean, yes, they are made in different regions of Portugal, but it does show that there is a definite difference between the two. Anyway, let's see what pass like. That's lovely. Full, rich, honeyed, really fruity. Get lots of kind of like tangerine, orange, apricot, dried grape. There's an edginess there. There's a slight herbal, edgy, burnt wood kind of note. Again, a lot of the Moscatel notes, more of the Moscatel notes than the Madeira. Although in saying that, the distillery character, the sort of minerally kind of subtle barley, does come through on the finish. It's not wholly swamped by the Moscatel, but it's only just hung in there, shall we say. I like it. I like the richness. I like the fact that it is quite different to the Madeira, and is I wouldn't quite say obviously Moscatel. You'd obviously have to know Moscatel to sort of go, oh yeah, that's obviously Moscatel finish, not Madeira finish. But it is definitely different, and it's, you know, that's, at the end of the day, you can't ask for more than that. The different finishing cask has added a different character, you know, the character of what was in there before. So in that instance, you know, you have to say that both of those bottlings were, you know, pretty damn good. They did exactly what you would hope a finishing cask would do. Little bit heavy though, it has to be said. Doesn't quite have the balance, I think, of the French collection. Maybe it's just that these were left a little bit too long in the finishing cask. Maybe it's the personality of the finishing casks were a little bit stronger than those of, say, Rives and Sauternes. I still think they're lovely whiskies, don't get me wrong, and I would quite happily drink either of those, and I think that, like I said, the Moscatel is very Moscatelli. So they're not one-dimensional sort of wood monsters by any stretch of the imagination, but I think if you're going to sort of like enjoy these, you're going to have to enjoy that kind of style of whiskey, shall we say.
And why the hell you down with that, do you understand? So,
right, okay, so let's move on to the portwood. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Oh, that's nice. Aromatic, subtle black fruit, straw. It's got an edginess to it again. There's sort of like a kind of a straw-like edginess. But that sort of silky barley and silky black fruits, a little bit of syrup possibly. It's kind of balancing really nicely. It's coming a bit herbal now. A little bit of almost kind of herbal vanilla, you know, vanilla pod rather than sort of vanilla extract. Yeah, it's got a really kind of pure herbal vanilla pod kind of note coming through. Touch of coffee. Yeah, I think that works quite nicely actually. Again, you could argue that the portwood is a little bit heavy, but I think the balance is a little bit better on this one than the Madeira and the Moscatel, but so how's that? That's lovely. Silky, juicy, elegant black fruit. touch of barley, touch of minerality, slight herbal note, again touch of straw, dried fruit, a little grippy on the mid palate and the finish. The tannins do kind of encroach a little bit, but spice, dark chocolate, chewy, malty finish, that worked really well. And like, I think the Tomatin and port finishing does seem to just work so nicely. I mean, in the core range you have the 14-year-old, albeit that's tawny port finish, if memory serves me correct. This is more, I don't think these are tawny casks. I would have guessed these are kind of ruby or possibly vintage casks. And it's just works really nicely. Lovely balance, plenty of port character, but plenty of distillery character. Lovely Highland note kind of underpinning all of that. Yeah, just really well balanced, I think. Right, okay, so on to the final bottling of the day. So this is the 15-year-old Bòcan, a little bit of peat and some sherry, I think. Let's see what those give us. That's a nice nose. Nice big whiff of smoke, a bit of herbal smoke, herbal oloroso, really meaty, cooked meat, barbecues. No, not quite barbecues, cooked meat, smoked meat, earthy, silky, dry fruit, really nicely balanced. Not getting a great deal of barley or any of that kind of character. I mean, it's got a lovely smokiness. It is, it's got that sort of herbal, astringent smokiness, green wood possibly. Really complex. Works just amazingly well. But then, as we know, sort of like peat and sherry, well, they do work. But I think this is more than just peat and sherry. It's got some maturity, probably a little bit more maturity than you would expect at 15, it has to be said. There's a little bit of marzipan and a touch of rose petal possibly, but that's lovely. That is absolutely gorgeous spirit. And I don't know, it's just sort of, Bòcan does. It's not the case of it doesn't really sell. I mean, it's sort of. It's not a difficult sale. It's not so. Well, let's put it this way. Obviously, all these comments that I make are holding my own and have no relevance or bearing to the company that employs me. But when customers come to the shop, they know Tomatin. They want to buy Tomatin. They'll say, "I want a Tomatin 12 or whatever." I don't think from memory I've had customers come in saying that I must have a bottle of Bòcan. It's it's something you've got to sell, and it doesn't kind of quite have the not cachet. Cachet is the wrong word. It doesn't quite have the standing of Tomatin. And when I think, and this is just an off-the-cuff kind of thing, I think it was when it was kind of part of Tomatin, when it wasn't sort of a standalone kind of thing, there was a kind of it kind of had a place, if you see what I mean. It was rooted, if you like. It was kind of like, yes, it's Tomatin Bòcan, not just Bòcan. I can see why the distillery would want to kind of hive it off as a standalone kind of entity in its own right, but by doing so it loses the association that it had with Tomatin, and you have to kind of then explain that it's actually lightly peated Tomatin, etc, etc. I mean, yes, all right, it's kind of shifting the sort of the balance of kind of sales onto the sort of like the merchant as opposed to sort of the distillery itself. And I come back to the packaging issues. Yes, it looks all kind of nice, but it was such a radical diversion from its original character, its original packaging and presentation. It's kind of, if it had been me, I would have just basically junked the name Bòcan. I mean, because it was synonymous with the old packaging, the devil dog, all that kind of stuff. If you wanted to do something completely different, I would have just basically said, right, okay, let's just knock Bòcan on the head and we'll just call it something completely and utterly different. It just kind of like drags along the baggage, if you like, I suppose. I don't think, I just think it was just handled completely wrongly. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the bottle shape now. I just don't warm to all this pastel colours and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't work for me, and it never has done. And I've told Tomatin that, I've told the rep on several occasions. So again, this is the criticism that I have of it is not exactly sort of unknown, shall we say, but you know, forgetting all of that packaging frippery, everything like that aside, and just concentrating on the juice in the glass, the juice, or the nose in this instance, because I've been yapping too much, is just bloody good. You know, let's face it. Meaty, cooked meat, rich, dark fruits, black fruit, tar, peat. A lot of peat in actual fact for a lightly peated spirit, it has to be said. And considering it's 15 years old as well, and that peat is still pretty intense. Dark chocolate, dark fruits, dark dried fruits, black grape, tobacco smoke, spice. I mean, that's a big whiskey. That's got a serious personality. Again, yes, all right, you can argue that a lot of this is peat and sherry, and yes, you would be quite right in saying this is a lot of peat and sherry. There is nuance though. I mean, there's a bit of barley if you search for it. There's a bit of almost kind of cognac-y dried fruit coming through as well, right on the finish. That sort of, you know, dried dark apple, dark chocolate. Yeah, I you know what, I really like that. I mean, I think that juice is bloody good, and I just keep coming back to the whole packaging issue and all that kind of stuff. I mean, although in saying that, I think this is more kind of red. I think the tube. I haven't actually seen it physically in the flesh, so to speak. And you know, I would just, you know, cut my losses at this point, and I'd go back to the old packaging. You know, keep the bottle shape is absolutely gorgeous, but just get rid of all this packaging, you know, this pastel colory stuff. Go back to the whole devil dog stuff, you know, a bit mysterious, a bit kind of spooky, a bit kind of like, you know, that to me was kind of really more interesting. And go back to using the Tomatin brand as well, and bring it back in-house and as part of Tomatin, but you know, giving it its own identity. You know, that's my personal opinion. I'm not a marketing, you know, monkey, you know, or an advertising guru or anything like that, but I really do think that Tomatin kind of made a big error with the repackaging of Bòcan personally. And you know, I'll stick by that, and I've told them that. Not that that's going to make any difference to a company like Tomatin. They're not going to listen to sort of like, you know, one person saying, I think you cocked up, because probably lots of people think that they've done a bloody marvellous job with it. But anyway, that's beside the point. All I can say is that, like I say, if you forget all the packaging issues, forget all the pastel colours and all that kind of stuff, and the Laura Ashley sort of shit. Oh, did I say that? Ooh, naughty word. You know, just concentrate on the juice. I mean, yeah, the juice in that 15-year-old is pretty damn good. That's all I say. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Well, big thank you to Hunter Lang and to Tomatin Distillery for the samples for today's episode of the show. The Edition Spirits bottling was just absolutely fantastic. Just beautiful old Tomatin. Sometimes, you know, I keep going on about it, sometimes, you know, you just want to put your spirit in an American oak cask, a refilled American oak cask, and just leave it. and you get that, and that was just absolutely beautiful. The Cognac edition, yeah, I really liked that. I thought the balance was absolutely spot on, and I think the balance for the whole of the French collection, and you know, you can still pick them up. They're still available. You know, all of the sort of French collection bottlings, as far as I'm aware. But the Cognac one, I thought just beautifully balanced. The Madeira finish, all right, okay, so a little bit heavy on the Madeira cask, it has to be said, but I think overall, yeah, I don't think the balance was too bad. Distinctly Madeira, and to a certain extent the Moscatel as well. Again, a bit heavy on the Moscatel, but you could tell it was Moscatel. So you know, maybe that's not quite such a bad thing. And the balance was just about there. But I would, you know, if it was me personally, and if I was being uber critical, I would just say that, you know, I would have just dialed back the length of time they were in the cask. Portwood finish, I think that was probably the most successful of the three. Don't know why it is, but Tomatin and port just seems to work really, really nicely together. And I just thought the balance was just, you know, significantly better. As I kind of ranted a fair amount about the Bòcan 15-year-old, all I can say is that whiskey is just absolutely sublime. It bloody good. And, you know, ignore anything else about it whatsoever and just focus on what's in your glass, because at the end of the day that's what you do. You just take the bottle out of the box, you pour yourself a dram, and you enjoy the dram, and that's all that matters at the end of the day. And that dram was bloody good, it has to be said. Lovely finish. Or finish to the episode, I should say. A lovely finish to the whiskey itself. So hopefully Tomatin will forgive me for being ultra critical, but you know, at the end of the day, you cannot criticise the quality of the spirit that is in that bottle, because that spirit was good. So there you go. That's this week's episode, the show in the bag. Hopefully I will do a Christmas episode before the end of the year, if I can shoehorn it in, obviously health issues aside, and work issues and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, the sparkly reindeer will put it in its appearance once a year, you know. So anyway, until then, all I have to say is good afternoon and good ramming.